Welcome to Lab Grown Marketing, the podcast rewriting the marketing playbook for the synthetic century. I'm Jon Lombardo.
And I'm Peter Weinberg. We're bringing together the latest thinking in marketing with the latest breakthroughs in AI.
So if you want to be in the top 1% of marketers, you're in the right place.
The biggest and best companies in the world, the OpenAIs, the Amazons, and the Facebooks, these are fundamentally advertising businesses.
What do all the executives at the biggest technology companies in the world get wrong about advertising? Today we're here to talk about that and dispel some key myths along the way.
Allora, Johnny.
I love this. I've been excited to do this particular episode for a long time now. Do you want to know why?
I would love to know why, Johnny. Tell us what excites you about today's episode.
I feel that people are always bad-mouthing advertising.
Totally agree.
And honestly, in many cases, it's people who work in advertising.
Yeah. It's funny. It's a very self-loathing industry.
So self-loathing.
Everyone in the advertising industry hates themselves and what they do. But as I think we will attempt to show today, they should have a little more pride in their work.
That's how I feel. I want this episode not to be self-loathing, but to be self-recommending.
Yeah, it's great. That's great.
It's great. It does lots of important things. I just generally feel advertising is one of the most misunderstood forms of economic infrastructure. That's one of the core ideas.
Wow, hot take.
Right. And we're going to get into like how people in advertising and outside of advertising talk about it and badmouth it, but we ain't going badmouth it today. We're going goodmouth it.
No, we're going to talk about why you shouldn't be ashamed to work in advertising.
You should be excited.
You should be excited. In fact, dare we say advertising will save the world. Advertising will cure cancer. There's a hot take for you.
I agree. It's speculative, but this idea of advertising saving the world, advertising curing cancer, maybe it's at least part of the process. Let's put it that way, or part of the equation.
Let's talk about the inspiration for this episode, which was a gentleman named Sam Altman. Am I pronouncing his name correctly? Altman?
Altman.
He is the CEO of an up-and-coming company. I believe it's called OpenAI. Have you heard of OpenAI, Johnny?
It's a small concern, as far as I can tell.
I believe it is a large language model known for a consumer application called ChatGPT.
Small concern, large model.
Sam Altman inspired this episode. Let me tell you a little about Sam Altman, okay? Let me give you some quotes. Quote number 1, I hate ads. I think ads plus AI is sort of uniquely unsettling to me. Sam Altman, January 2024. We have no plans to put ads in ChatGPT. Sam Altman, March 2024. May 2024, I kind of think of ads as like a last resort for us as a business model. February 9th, 2026, OpenAI introduces ads in ChatGPT for free or go subscription tiers.
Can I tell you another story about the arc of advertising?
Sure. Has this story ever happened before?
It's not an A, Altman, it's a B, Bezos.
Bezos? Jeffrey Bezos, our close personal friend?
Yeah, a small yet emerging and maybe potentially important going forward company called Amazon.
I believe they're up-and-comer in e-commerce.
Yeah. They're kind of a challenger to Shopify. He says in 2009, advertising is the price you pay for having an unremarkable product. That's 2009. Fast forward to 2018, he has a change of heart. And Amazon is now one of the absolute biggest advertisers in the world. They have a huge ad product themselves that is one of the absolute most profitable parts of their business.
It's funny. Now that you're mentioning this example, it's kind of making me think about this other guy. Have you ever heard of this guy, Mark Zuckerberg?
From A to B to Z, Zuckerberg.
He's the CEO of a company called Meta, once called Facebook. In the mid-2000s, he made it clear that Facebook is quote-unquote not about ads. He said that they would go to great lengths to limit ads and make sure Facebook is user-centric. In fact, in The Social Network, which I recently rewatched on a plane, what a movie, he says ads aren't cool. We don't want to ruin the thing by putting ads in it, much to the chagrin of Eduardo Saverin, who was out there trying to sell ads to as many advertisers as he could. Flash forward, a decade or two, not even. I think it was actually just a couple of years. I believe Facebook may have an ad business. Does Facebook have an ad business, Johnny?
Yeah, but I think margins are only like 99%.
It's just a small part of their business. Yeah. I think it's just 99%.
99% of their revenue and all
right?
of their margin, yeah.
And then you've got Zuckerberg made a lot of splashes with his recent comment of, we're going to get to a point where you come to us. You tell us what your objective is. You don't need any creative. You don't need any targeting demographic. You don't need any measurement except to be able to read the results that we spit out. In other words, he's now actually like building the future of advertising and like an advertising prophet from an advertising skeptic to an advertising prophet. So there's a key through line here, right? Which is that everyone hates advertising. Actually, let's give the quote to David Droga. It's one of my all-time favorite quotes. Sums it all up quite nicely. Funny how everyone hates advertising until they want to sell their house or find their missing cat. To which we could add, everyone hates advertising until they need to scale their large language model business or scale their e-commerce business or scale their social network business, right?
This is a tale as old as time, which is why I will repeat, advertising is one of the most misunderstood forms of economic infrastructure.
Right.
It powers growth, access, innovation, maybe even saves lives, but nobody wants to give it any credit.
Nobody, even the people who have the biggest ad businesses,
especially
and spend
the people
the
who have
most
the biggest
money
ad businesses
on advertising, even these people hate advertising right up until they need it.
I mean, the person I think is the most compelling on this topic, actually, who does not have this point of view, is Ben Thompson, who's the analyst from Stratechery, has his own newsletter.
Yep.
He's a guy who's made, he ironically does not have advertising as part of his model. It's all subscription. He probably makes $10 million, $20 million a year. But he has written extensively about how useful ads are in building a fast-growing, accessible to rich and poor people alike global business. I mean, and so he's been pushing OpenAI to basically advertise for a long time. I mean, his argument is actually that OpenAI didn't introduce ads early enough. If they had introduced it earlier, they weren't like this, so ideological about it. They would have grown faster. They would have been able to outflank Anthropic more. Like that to me is a very compelling way to think about it.
Yeah. And then, by the way, when Anthropic finally got the opportunity to have a Super Bowl ad, what feature? Anthropic, Claude, one of the greatest products of all time. What is the product feature they chose to play up in their Super Bowl ad?
We don't have ads.
We don't have ads, right?
It was basically an ad where they hired some guy who looks like Sam Altman and criticized the fact that they have ads, which nobody cares about. Like people love Facebook. They love Google. They love these ad-driven products. Like it's ridiculous to take that point of view.
Also, let's just take a moment to reflect on the fact they wanted to talk trash about how ChatGPT has ads and how bad ads are, so they bought a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah, it's right.
An ad.
I didn't even think about the irony of it.
It's an ad about how terrible advertisements are, right? So it's just like the double speak and hypocrisy of all the leaders of these industries about advertising. It's very painful as someone who's worked in advertising his entire career, right?
I guess here's a word of advice for the next OpenAI.
Yeah.
Or the next Anthropic. Don't criticize advertising, because guess what? Either you will become an advertising business or you'll take out ads to criticize an advertising business.
Right,
So put away the hypocrisy and start putting out the ads.
Yeah. It's like Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Everyone hates ads until they get punched in the face.
It's kind of pathetic virtue signaling in some ways, I would say. It's like, oh, we're not an advertising business. I think they just think it makes them appear more moral.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question as to why they're always talking shit about advertising. I guess my theory would be these are all product people.
No question.
And product people think all that matters is like the sanctity of the product and having a great product.
Yeah.
And they have the perception that advertising is at odds with having a great product, which I think is like a somewhat reasonable theory. Until, again, you just like look at all the actual performance of these companies. Like if advertising ruined Google, then how come Google is such an incredibly successful business with advertising, right? Doesn't seem to have slowed down YouTube or search or Instagram to have advertising. So it's clearly not quite as damaging to the product as everybody likes to think it is.
The single most important thing is scale. and advertising helps you scale. And in many cases, obviously, given how many people use these products every day and see ads every day, advertising is actually integral to having a great product. It is not what prevents you from having a great product. Like, I think you could flip it on its head.
Yeah, it's what allows you to have a great product in the first place.
Or it's one of the things that allow you to build a very strong business that can scale globally.
Yes. So let's pivot to mental models of marketing, one of our most beloved segments on the podcast. So if everyone's virtue signaling to say how horrible advertising is, why don't you and I do a little virtue signaling about the virtues of advertising and how actually advertising might just save the world? I think we've touched on one of these already, which is basically just the idea that advertising subsidizes things that people want. Kind of in two categories in terms of just like generally lowering the cost of products so that more people can use them. And then also crucially funding innovation, right? And I think it's actually particularly obvious in the OpenAI example, right? Like the advertising is going to fund the growth and development of OpenAI, which is itself a completely transformative technology that very well might cure cancer or get humans to Mars or whatever the next leap is that will be, enabled by AI, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of it simply like I told you, I emailed once my favorite economist, Tyler Cowen.
You like Tyler Cowen? Yeah. You never mentioned that before.
I talk about him on every podcast because I love him so much. I emailed him and I was like, he's an economist. I don't think he'd ever written about advertising as far as I could tell. I said, what is, in your view, the purpose of advertising? And he said, actually, it is about matching buyers and sellers. So it's supply and demand. It's about access. And I think that is, to me, one of the most wonderful things about it. It is, in that way, it is economic infrastructure. It is market-making infrastructure.
Yeah.
It matches buyers. I have a product. I need to find buyers so I can grow my business, so I can hire people, so I can challenge incumbents, all things that are good for the kind of growth and diversity and competitiveness of the economy. Advertising is fundamental to it. It's part of the reason that advertising, I still remember reading an article a couple of years ago, or maybe it was 10 years ago at this point, that said like, oh, the advertising market will hit $200 billion. Most of the forecasts are too low. And now I think the advertising market is like $672 billion globally. Like it will just continue to grow because actually it's really valuable and really useful. And people, though they say they don't like it, they really don't care that much about it.
Yeah,
like, they're not bothered by it is what I mean.
It's grease on the wheels of capitalism, And I think there's kind of actually 2 points you just made. One is this like information theory of advertising, which is, it helps match buyers and sellers. It makes it easier for buyers to navigate the world. I think, to make this a little abstract, I think a great way to demonstrate it is to go into a grocery store in a foreign country. So like I once went into a grocery store in Tokyo to try to buy a snack. I came out 6 hours later because I couldn't figure out what to buy. I had to stand at the shelf, just sort of like mystified, basically wasting 6 hours of my life trying to find the snack I want. You go into an American grocery store, I want some goldfish. In and out, 10 seconds, back home with the kids, right? So it's basically saves you time on decision making for like relatively low stakes decisions, allows you to find what is the right product for your use case, and kind of move on with your life. And that is like a useful function for an actual customer. It helps give them guidance on what to buy, And everyone's like, oh, it's manipulative. And it's like, okay, well, again, the alternative is a world where you have absolutely no idea how to navigate the supermarket or the CRM marketplace or the IT service management marketplace, right? It's actually fundamentally giving you some form of information.
Yeah, I think people project a lot of fear and concern onto advertising, like it is persuasion, it is manipulation. And in fact, I think our view is the opposite of that. People have this strong this view of like advertising is a strong force,
right?
And we have the opposite view, which is advertising is a weak force.
Yeah, it's a very weak nudge.
It's why it needs so much scale, because it's a very weak force. only with massive scale can it possibly be effective. And so I think number one, people just fundamentally have the wrong mental model of it as a strong force versus a weak force. That's
It's
number one.
It's not mind control.
No,
it's just
not.
like a little nudge,
It's at best. And so it's not persuasion. It's just infrastructure. Like that would be one way to just totally reframe it. And infrastructure is why it's so able to scale globally, because it works in almost any market, whether it is the United States or Japan, as you just said.
Yeah, by the way, it's actually like regulated. Like there is such a thing as false advertising. Like you're not allowed to make false claims. Right. You have to get your claims legally approved, right? So the idea that it's just like pure manipulation, like in many cases, it's better regulated than other sources of information that people get access to.
And it does, especially, coming back to your point about, fears people have around it. There is this idea that it is like manipulative and in some ways like that, I guess big players are going to be able to better manipulate you and better dominate the market. But in fact, I would argue that advertising, generally speaking, because it is about discovery and information, it allows more people to discover smaller companies and different companies. And so in some ways, it doesn't guarantee competition, but it enables competition, enables other small brands like us or like Warby Parker, when it was small, to advertise, to challenge Luxottica, or us to challenge Kantar or whoever it is.
Totally.
And so there's another benefit to it, which I would argue is it increases competition and increases discovery. And that, again, is better for diversification of the economy.
Yeah. I mean, how else would small brands grow and how would they compete if they couldn't tell people they exist? You can't buy something if you don't know it exists, right?
And meanwhile, Facebook is particularly valuable in this way, actually.
Yeah, it is.
Because so much of their revenue comes from small businesses.
That's the number one segment, Actually, most of these ad businesses, if you look at who the biggest spenders are, it is small businesses. It's not the gigantic enterprises.
Yeah, most of their money and their margin, which funds lots of other stuff, comes from self-service.
Yeah.
Right, which is people advertising themselves.
When we were at LinkedIn, the fast-growing segment was what they called mid-market, right? It wasn't the gigantic strategic accounts. It was the mid-market, right? And I think it's actually, this has only become more true over time, right? Like back in the day, maybe when there were just 3 channels you could advertise on and TV commercials were incredibly expensive, maybe it was only something available to big businesses. But with the growth of digital advertising, which again, everyone trash talks, like digital advertising ruined the planet Earth. Now you can advertise for cents on the dollar, which all of a sudden brings smaller businesses into the ecosystem and gives them a tool in the tool belt to grow, which I think is just lovely. It's
Apparently,
a wonderful thing.
During COVID, as I was researching for this episode, obviously the physical world was shut down, and the way that lots of businesses were able to survive was by advertising online and advertising online globally. So if you were a business in Ghana or in Germany or in Chile or in New York City, you could now reach people to buy your product and service outside of your core market. And so, in some ways, that was a place where it at least allowed businesses to survive.
Right.
And that's, again, advertising makes businesses and markets more resilient.
Right. And to your point, allows smaller countries to compete with bigger countries because it gives them access to the market.
The bada bing, bada boom on this is basically ultimately that I would argue advertising allows more people to access products. So more people are going to be able to access OpenAI when they have an advertising free tier, right? I have to pay $20 or $200. A lot of people don't have money to pay for it, but they'll still be able to access it through advertising. That's a huge moral good for everybody, right? A public good for everybody. That's wonderful. It's like a way that advertising increases market participation globally.
Right.
Love
Subsidizes costs.
Right. And then the second bit of it is just that now that everyone has access to something, right? Businesses, people, there's going to be better ideas. There'll be more companies formed, which we're starting to see with AI. And ultimately, you're going to have more, I believe, economic growth in the end, which is good in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, the bada bing, bada boom for me is like advertising saves customers time and it makes businesses a dime, if I were to make a rhyme. Let's talk about innovation because it's particularly salient right now with the growth of these LLMs, right? So like who invented the transformer?
Google.
How did Google have all of that cash to spend on R&D, on the massive investment required for DeepMind and transformers and these transformative technologies? Where did the money come from, John?
Advertising throughout, like especially I would call it the last 100 years, has been one of the most clear ways you can fund risky R&D bets. If you have huge revenues, huge margins from advertising that allows you to fund bets that Google makes, like DeepMind in AI or Waymo in autonomous vehicles. So that is a place where, advertising is funding innovation, and innovation is going to it already is saving lives with things like Waymo. Waymo is much safer, Tesla much safer.
Much safer than humans driving.
Yeah. And this is a bit more speculative, but it seems like all the DeepMind work, which, the reason they could buy DeepMind is advertising, that stuff like AlphaFold, protein folding, that's going to save lives in the medical world.
Yeah, they're going to have better diagnostics in the medical world. They're going to have better drugs, all from LLMs, which were ultimately funded by advertising. Just to put some data against it, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, has spent more than $150 billion on R&D over the past 5 years.
Yeah, so
and
AI
75% of their revenue is from advertising.
I mean, to be clear, AI existed. There was AI research being done before it was funded by advertising. But again, the scale we're talking about, the global access, the global scale for consumers and for businesses, this would not be possible. You wouldn't be able to distribute it everywhere, build data centers everywhere without the proceeds from advertising.
Yeah, so I would say 5 years from now, when you're sitting in a car that's driving itself, talking to a magical robot about all of your biggest problems, using some sort of social network to keep in touch with your, uncle in Ghana, just think to yourself, thank you, advertisers of the world. Thank you, advertising industry, for funding all of these marvelous innovations that have allowed us to live in this wonderful world.
So yeah, it's kind of like these executives all get it backwards a little bit. It's kind of like, thank you, advertising, for making, in large part, a lot of these innovations and technologies possible.
Yeah, they're biting the hand that feeds them, basically. Let's end with some $1 million data, where we actually ran a synthetic survey using the Evidenza Corporazione, the Evidenza platform. So we surveyed 1,066 respondents, synthetic respondents, AI-generated respondents, to understand their perceptions of advertising. And a neat thing about our platform is that you can cut the data by different segments with statistical significance. So we also did some data cuts of how do advertising professionals think about advertising, and how does the general population think about advertising. The first finding was that 58% of people had a somewhat favorable or very favorable perspective on advertising.
There's one thing that surprises me about this, and there's one thing that dismays me about this. What surprises me is actually 58% of people are favorable or somewhat favorable. I actually would have thought it would have been more 50-50. What dismays me about this is most people, an overwhelming majority of people, should think that advertising is great, that advertising is wonderful. I know that they don't, but I wish that they did.
I was completely shocked by this finding, honestly. I couldn't believe it. I think even although I like advertising, have a generally favorable opinion of it, I would have assumed people really don't like it. And actually, there's been multiple rounds of research from other traditional research companies about this over the past decade, and they have actually all confirmed pretty much this finding, which is that the general population does not have an unfavorable opinion of advertising. If you ask the question a certain way, you can skew the results, though. Like if you ask them, do you want like hyper-targeted advertising that uses your personal data to deliver, information? People do have a generally unfavorable perspective on that. So a lot of this, I think, is about framing and how you frame what advertising is. If you just say, do you hate advertising? Most people are actually not going to say yes.
I think you could tie this back to all the tech executives. They're very data-driven people.
Right.
They don't really understand the data or the polling on advertising.
Right.
I think if any of them understood that actually something like 60% of people either have a somewhat or a very favorable view of advertising, they would probably say, actually, I wouldn't be out here bad-mouthing advertising because, in fact, most people like it.
Yeah, and they are not representative. Like, I think if we did, and we should do it as a follow-up, if we did a survey of product leaders in Silicon Valley, what is their perception of advertising? It probably is pretty negative relative to the general population. So they're just taking their own personal beliefs about advertising and scaling it to the entire world.
I think there's there's a really interesting insight in this, the point you're making about the individual versus kind of let's call it the system, which is that systematically advertising is very important to the economy. We talked about that. And people seem to recognize that and as a result have a generally favorable view of it. But ads are individually very annoying or can be very annoying, maybe especially for rich people who don't want to see them. But this idea of the system's view is like generally favorable versus the individual's view, they're a bit in contrast or in conflict. And that's why you often hear people saying bad things about advertising because they've seen one ad that annoys them. But at the same time, as a group, they kind of recognize that it's valuable to the economic system.
And here is a hilarious finding that is also somewhat unsurprising. If you ask the synthetic sample, when you think about advertising, which view comes to mind first, and then give them a sort of list of views or perspectives, the answer mostly creates waste and noise. Ad professionals choose that choice at double the rate of the general public.
Yeah, well, this makes sense. It's like the individual tech executives are saying, I don't like it. And people in advertising see so much advertising that they can be annoyed by it in the same way a tech executive might.
Because they're actually
be
paying
annoyed
attention
by
to it and overthinking it.
But again, like the reality is like they're all making, I would say, this category error of assuming that it is a strong force when in fact it is a weak force.
But this is why I wish somebody would run an advertising campaign for the advertising industry. And I think we sort of actually did simulate that because, for example, we asked people if a company used advertising to fund AI products that improved healthcare, climate forecasting, and education, how would that affect your view of advertising? And 52% agreed that it would make them view advertising more positively, right? In a similar vein, when you ask people to think about free or low-cost internet products, what business model comes to mind first? 86% of the general public says ads, right? So it's all about framing, which I think we've attempted to do a bit in this episode, is if you just say like, hey, do you like super intrusive ads based on your personal data? No, people are not going to respond favorably to that. If you just ask about ads in general, somewhat favorable response actually. If you point out the things advertising actually does, like fund innovation and subsidize the cost of products, all of a sudden people do have a more favorable view of advertising. It's just that, ironically, the advertising industry is doing a terrible job advertising itself.
There's obviously got to be some element of privacy that matters in this conversation as well. I don't believe people are bothered by seeing an Apple ad on a billboard, and I don't believe they're bothered by seeing an Amazon ad on TV or an OpenAI ad on TV, or ironically, an Anthropic ad on TV. People do get unnerved and feel creeped out when they feel that they're being tracked online.
Yeah.
And so
There's
on the other hand, there's been so many data leaks now that there is almost really no privacy anymore. I mean, I'm not sure that. So on the one hand, like people are creeped out by privacy. On the other hand, they don't seem to be creeped out by privacy at all because everybody's data is available.
Yeah,
now.
I don't think they really care. If they cared so much, they wouldn't be using all of these
exactly,
platforms, right?
right?
I think you also bring up an important point there, which is like, and this came through in the qual when we looked at the verbatims in this survey. People like good ads.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
they don't like bad ads. And by the way, people don't really remember bad ads because they're bad. So if you ask people to think of an ad, they usually end up thinking of a really good ad they saw that made an impression on them. Like I always think of that It's What You Do in the Dark campaign from Under Armour, which I originally thought was from Nike because it was a poorly branded advertisement, by the way. But it was a great story, very emotional. It's a great ad. I think of Lovely Day for a Guinness, right? Like you start to think of like good ads that you like, and that makes a positive impression, right?
I think my key takeaway here is it doesn't really matter what any of these people think, because the reality is that advertising has gone from being a $200 billion category to being a $600, $700 billion category. Advertising is fundamental economic infrastructure. It connects buyers and sellers. It lowers discovery costs. It makes products more accessible to people globally and funds innovation. Maybe it will save lives. Maybe it already is saving lives. And the reality is that's just going to continue marching on. It doesn't really matter. It's unstoppable. Yeah. It is the air that we breathe, the infrastructure on which we run.
At the same time, I think given that advertising is actually useful, you want people to want to work in advertising, and all of this self-loathing stuff about how horrible it is and how, anything but advertising is the business model. It's not good for the talent draw, right?
But arguably the opposite side of that is if you ask people the companies they would most want to work for, they would be Google, they would be Meta, they would be Microsoft, they would be OpenAI, they would be Anthropic. And so
Netflix.
The companies that they most want to work at are advertising companies. And so what people say and what people do are very different things.
Final bada bings, bada booms from you on advertising?
I mean, the point of this episode, which I think we could kind of say is like, advertising saves the world, or at least advertising funds the things that save the world.
Yeah, sure.
Is that I do feel advertising is deeply misunderstood. It is the infrastructure we run on, the air that we breathe. I hope in some ways, we've made clear that it makes things more accessible. It helps economies grow. It helps create jobs. It funds life-saving technologies and innovation. And honestly, it's more of a weak force than a strong force. Like a lot of these ideas, if people just understand these things more, I feel they'll have a better view, a more clear view of what it is versus the misunderstood view that even really smart people like Sam Altman, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, A, B, and Z don't seem to have.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode, and we will see you next time in the laboratorio for a new episode of Lab Grown Marketing.
Ciao for now.
Well, I think that's it for this week on Lab Grown Marketing.
Make sure to join us next time for another episode on marketing effectiveness and AI intelligence.
And if you want to stay ahead of the two biggest revolutions in marketing, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn.
I'm John Lombardo, you're Peter Weinberg. And if you're ready to see what lab-grown research and strategy can do for your brand, please visit us, of course, at evidenza.ai. Ciao for now.